I guess another question for the room. Who here has heard about Astro before this talk? So some hands, cool. Yeah, it's. I feel like I'm trying to get into the talk without getting into the talk, but I like it. I managed to convince quite a few of my friends to use it, so obviously biased, but you'll see that this talk sort of also isn't about Astro. It's also just about generally websites in general and how one goes about making them, and also how not to make them. So, I don't know. People are getting pizza.
So while we are having exams, my name is Abdul. I work with Tekena as local talent lead. And I think if you are here, you probably know what Tekena does, but if you don't, Tekena essentially supports the local tech ecosystem here in Finland. So be it high school students, post-secondary students, job seekers, businesses, startup developers. So if there is some way you need support, doing any particular, please reach out. Particularly, I work with job seekers, new grads, and newcomers, or if you're looking to just transition from a different career into tech. Please reach out to me. You can go to the Techno website. Sorry, I'm tired. I ran a few errands before. So you can go to the Techno website, go to the team members, you'll see my picture, send me an email, or you will find me on CTSNL Discord. We're having series of events. If you have some time, just come around for the event. Next month, we're having a data workshop and also a summer networking. The networking is now essentially we're having like office tours, visiting some companies, do some demo with those companies, and then we'll go around a few companies. We'll stop at the Co-Innovation Center to have some summer style networking. And then August, we do networking. And September, we are having back to like technical talk. So please come around for the event if you have some time. We're having Astro today. A lot of us, hopefully I'm able to go today, but a lot of us will be moving from here down to jump in on Elizabeth Avenue for weekly CTS. So if you have some time, it's casual, it's lovely. You meet him in person if you haven't. Please come around and let's have a nice one. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Abdul Kabir. So feel free to keep the pizza in your hands because we're not going to jump into the workshop section in a bit, and I'll give you some pause to degreasify your fingers before you greasify your keyboards. So this is a workshop on Astro. I sort of have like a game plan of how I want this to go. I'm going to talk for a bit about websites and stuff, and then we will all together cook up a nice little Astro website. I'm sort of inspired from Ethan and Riley, aka Web3D Man and Docker Man, who gave the two previous talks before me. I know Ethan's I'm taking a lot of inspiration from, who's here in the audience. Shout out Ethan for sort of the talk portion, workshop portion. I didn't get to go to Riley's. I really wanted to. I was in the UK at the time. But yeah, also I am an opinion haver. So I'd like to say my opinion is good, but just so you know, do not take my advice as gospel. I am merely a person who builds stuff and has built enough to the point that I'm, for some reason, given the trust to stand in front of other people and tell them what to use. Also, talk to me. If you want to just shout something out, raise your hand during both the talk portion and the workshop. The talk portion might end up just me beaming, me saying things about stuff. But if you have something to add, want to point out something, feel free. I'm down with this turning a bit more into like a conversation and sort of bringing it in the direction that, of what people want to learn and talk about. But if you don't, that's also fine. So I think when you're doing a workshop or doing a talk, the idea you sort of have to know is that people aren't going to, all of a sudden after the workshop go crazy with what you're teaching them. You kind of have to come up with like some takeaway that you hopefully leave the room with, even if that's not necessarily Astro, but like, oh, this is now a tool I'm aware of. So for like, Ethan's talk was, here's how to do 3D in the web using 3JS, obviously extremely simplified. Riley's, who I didn't go to, but I looked at the slides, was sort of like, this Docker thing under the hood is more than you might know, and it's quite nice, isn't it? Is that an apt summary, would you say, Riley? To a certain degree. Mine, now obviously I haven't given it yet, so I don't know if you'll actually walk away with this, but my intent is to let you know that there is many ways to build a website. It really depends on who you're making it for, the funds available both to yourself and to whoever you're making it for, and how much they want to pay you, time commitment of like how much time do you reasonably have, not just hypothetical, I have all the time in the world to build this, but how much time do you actually want to put into it? What's your skill level? Like, are you up for a really big project, or should you maybe take smaller little bite-sized things, etc.? And that like Astro is what I usually reach for in these contexts, but obviously it is not the only tool to solve problems in the web. There's too many of them. So who in this room has been asked by someone they know, either like a coworker, a friend, a random person who has given your phone number, to build a website for them? So like quite a few hands, right? If you're kind of known in your family or your friend group or in work that you are the website builder, is that hand in the back or just, yeah?
I built so many websites. WordPress.
Yes, WordPress. There you go. Yeah, I knew I'd have at least some people here who are proficient with that. So yeah, the people, even if you're not primarily sort of like an agency, most likely you have been asked by someone to build a website. So the year is 2018. I am pretty fresh. I think this was actually right before I got my first software job. I knew enough to be dangerous. I had done a little bit of MUN. And I am asked to make a website for what I believe was the first time. So that website was for a little radio station called VOWR. I think a friend of mine was volunteering and was on their board at some level. And their website at the time, as you can see, I'm using the lovely Internet Archive Wayback Machine, looked like this. I think they had gotten Bell at some point when they offered this service to build websites for you to make them a website. And so I get this big email. It basically kind of boils down to like, we have a website. It's a website. Can you help us make a better one? I'm not too skilled at this point in time. The first revision looks a little bit like this. Nothing flashy, like a bit more boring and normal, so to speak. But I show it to them, sort of saying like, here's my first stab at what I think the structure should be. And I get back this like pretty lengthy email that supposedly during a board meeting in VOWR, they went over the website, and the people who I assume were not website developers had this big list of comments on like, I don't like how the description looks, or the hover's not right, so on and so forth. The end result was that I ghosted them. I ended up basically sort of, I don't know, I was busy. I think I literally just started working at like Blue Job at the time, my first job, and it just fell off my plate. So like my stack was vanilla, HTML, CSS, and JavaScript because that is what I knew at the time. My time spent on it was definitely not very much, and my customer was a non-profit board. So unfortunately, a bit of a interesting entity that would get together, come up with a meeting summary, and sort of give me a laundry list of things to do that weren't exactly sort of trying to be like a visionary slash we're going to design it for you, but also me being like not a very good mix, right? Like non-profit board, extremely inexperienced teenager. I didn't really end up very well. In the room, what do you think I should have done differently? If you were in my shoes at that point in time, what would have you done?
Collect requirements ahead of time.
That's a good one. Yeah. So I had some level of stuff, but I definitely didn't really know what I was doing ahead of time. Any other ideas?
Say no.
That's the one I was looking for. Sometimes you do have to know. I mean, that was also not just because I didn't really have the time for it, but that I was really inexperienced. Like, maybe I should have reached for a WordPress or a Wix or a Squarespace, and it would have been perfectly fine. Obviously, a consideration there is funds. Usually nonprofits don't have much to spend, so I could have even collected maybe as well. Like, okay, what's your existing spend? So then I can sort of use that as my budget for this website I'll go and reach out to. A thing as well, if they wanted to modify content on the website, could they have done it themselves given my vanilla stack? No, right? So I then would have become bottlenecked into, oh, can you add this section? Or, oh, the live radio button is broken. I would have been on the line for that, basically, since I had no content management system, or I didn't pick something off of the shelf that could have done the job just as fine. So let's skip ahead a bit. I mean, I feel like I was asked some things between 2018 and 2023, but like the next big noticeable one was a friend of mine reached out and was like, hey, a high school friend of mine was like, I wanted to get a website on the go for No Signal. It was his clothing brand he was sort of running at the time. Now, you know, at this point, I'm been a developer for much longer with a lot more skill and ability under my belt. Therefore, I told him to just use Shopify. And that was the perfect thing because he went and got his friends to do some sick photography. I had to use the Internet Archive because I think his venture isn't on the go. But at one point in time, he had a lovely selection of caps and, you know, add to cart and so on and so forth. Could have went and built that and been part of my friend's venture? Yes. But like, if you look into sort of implementing an e-commerce site, not really using an out-of-the-box tool, it's not too trivial. Shopify has a thing called Hydrogen, which lets you potentially like make a pseudo React site with like add to cart and cart components sort of baked in for you. If you really do want to have full creative control over how it looks, there's enough templates in the templates bin that likely what they're looking for already exists. So I feel like that was the good call. So the stack was no stack. The time spent was 0. The customer was a friend. And honestly, I look at that as a win because I could have potentially been like, I'll build you something, but I was just like, just use Shopify. So the moral of the story is Jack should not pilot a web dev agency. So why is he giving this talk/workshop? So I haven't made a ton of websites for other entities, but I've definitely made my own personal websites over the years, and as well, if I've been affiliated with something like CTSNL or the Money Computer Sciences Society, usually those things still do need a web presence. And also costs are usually prohibitive for that sort of entity, right? Like the most you'd like to pay for a website for like a community group is probably the domain. Like that's about it. So a lot of my choices have definitely been optimized for that. So yeah, I'm not really a web developer trying to make like the next huge thing. Like, and so yeah. This is where we segue into a blog post that I wrote some time ago called I Like Astro. This blog post is about Astro, but it's also sort of summarizing like websites that I built throughout the years. So it's up on my Mun blog. I'll have a big list of all this stuff afterwards, but I'm not going to read through the whole thing. What I basically want to do, though, is talking about how in 2014, I had a website that looked like this. It was a picture of my head sort of cut out in Inkscape with 3 big buttons and the big text V1 on the bottom. I think this was also like a HTML, CSS, JavaScript website hosted on a cPanel instance because it was still, you know, an era where that wasn't too crazy to be reached for. No PHP, just HTML, CSS, JavaScript, but you know, so I've been around long enough, I guess, to have somewhat of an opinion. I feel there's people in this room who've been in it long enough, much longer than me, but I do feel like I've sort of dipped my feet enough in to have some opinions. So I sort of jumped around with what technical stack my website was built with over the years. At one point in time, it was built using Webpack. I think is still relevant today. I feel like less so given with things like Vite and TurboPack, but I used Webpack at one point in time. I also think I used Parcel, like an early version of Parcel at some point in time for it, which, these two things are not really like website building tools per se. They're more web app building tools, in my sort of opinion. I probably went back to some plain HTML, CSS, JavaScript. One of them had a backend that was serving blog posts from a database, which means that I lost those blog posts because eventually, that database went down and I didn't back it up and I lost persistence and goodbye database. I think I had a version written in Crystal as well, a very like nuanced Ruby-like systems programming language. So I've sort of had like a multiple different sort of versions of my website over the last decade. And so the current version of jackharry.com was not my first Astro endeavor. So one of the first times I reached for Astro was building the website for the MUN Computer Science Society, of which I'm sort of still part of, not really, because I basically dropped out of MUN. So when I started at MUN, the website looked like this. You'll see it doesn't look, I guess, a whole lot different than what the current version looks like. I definitely used it as sort of a reference of a good structure. And this version of the website was built using Lector. And so Lector was one of those, a bit similar to Hugo, Jekyll, so on and so forth. It sort of was a like Python native, like you have a file system and you write some markdown files into a thing and then you run a command and it uses a Jinja-like syntax to sort of structure together HTML and boom, you pop out a website. I know that at some point in time, I have this link, Riley went crazy and added like an entire blog system, like dynamic blog system to the website where you could like run a script to make a new post. But none of this was using Lector features. This was literally just us like writing, our own Python tooling around Lector to make it easier to make more blog posts. So with things like Lector, it's if you want something that's maybe a little bit more similar to a WordPress or a more like out-of-the-box experience, some tools don't really give that to you. Lector definitely wasn't as good as things like Jekyll and Hugo, but I think I also then tried to use a thing called Gatsby at some point in time, which is what if we went insane and made a website builder out of GraphQL. That was sort of not very fun. But basically, I eventually learned about Astro. It's what I use to build the current version of the website. I'll get to reasons why this is sort of very cool. One of the biggest things is if I refresh this page, if you check out this latest document section, you'll see that when I refresh the page, oh, is it caching? It's my internet speed's too fast. But if you load the page, it starts out as a ... and then it fetches the contents for latest documents after the page loads. But if you go to pages like the events page, these are not fetched dynamically. They are actually baked into the page itself. We'll get to the fun of that later. We'll get back to the slides for now. So a brief overview incoming of common ways people, even folks like yourselves, tools they use to make websites. The obvious, elephant in the room is WordPress. WordPress is used by basically like 1 in 2 websites. It's been around forever. It's a bit of a hunk of PHP that's better suited for blogs than it is for other things, but people do usually take WordPress and go, oh, I can add a plugin to it, and now it manages my entire like theater booking system. The Majestic. Which I've had to help debug, and it's nightmarish under the hood when you try and make WordPress do things more than just blogs, in my opinion. But it can be done, and there's nothing against WordPress. I am not a PHP/WordPress developer. I'm in the room with some of them. It's obviously extremely valid. There's an entire sort of wing of people that sort of put WordPress developer on their resume, and that's what they primarily do. So in my opinion, you can't really hate WordPress, but I know I have some friends in the audience that potentially are also a bit more security minded than others. And self-hosted WordPress, if you don't keep it up to date, can potentially become a shell pinata. So if you do use WordPress, it's better to use hosted WordPress, such as WordPress.org or .com, whatever it is, or WP Engine. I didn't say that. But yeah, WordPress is a thing. I'm not going to talk about it too much. There actually is a weird thing you can do where you can use WordPress as your content management system for Astro. We're not going to talk about that a ton today, but like WordPress can still actually be a piece of your Astro website if you want it to be. You've got your usuals, your Squarespaces, your Webflows, your Wix. Some of them will just sort of give you a template and say, here you go. Webflow is definitely a bit more, here is a big bag of tools that sort of is almost like you're doing web development, but it's all, what you see is what you get, WYSIWYG style. The two last companies I've worked for, I currently work for Spellbook. I worked for Collab Software before that. Some people might assume that if you work for a software company, you have like a team of developers. So obviously you use that existing talent to make your website. No, you don't do that. Because you usually want your marketing folks to sort of be disconnected from your developers. So both of these, obviously biased, quite nice looking landing pages for companies I've worked for, they use Webflow. That means that, I'm not on call for the main website going down or making changes to copy, so on and so forth. Basically, companies I've been at just sort of haven't had developers touch the main website, and I think that is the way to go. So yeah, things like Squarespace, Wix, and Webflow, perfectly valid ways to make websites.
Sorry, I've got a question. Which do you recommend, which is more secure? Because I know WordPress has a lot of issues with security,
So WordPress is, if you don't pick, if you're careful about what plugins you install.
Yeah, but they had some issues with some recent plugins, and they had security issues.
Yeah, it's.
And I was hoping one of these would be better.
I mean, these are definitely a lot more. These will likely be a bit more expensive because usually with WordPress, WordPress themselves sort of just gives you, like a base instance. And if you want more functionality, you either write it yourself with PHP or you find plugins that gives you that functionality. With these, they're more like they come out of the box, sort of pre-built in a way. So they're sometimes a bit less customizable, but also easier for non-technical people to work on them. That's why I basically said where a WordPress site would likely need a WordPress developer to make non-trivial changes to it, but a Webflow site or a Squarespace site or a Wix site would likely be a lot easier for non-technical people to collaborate on. So it depends on if you're trying to find a tool for a marketing team to use, or you want a tool as if you're a developer to use. I'd still probably say things like WordPress are better suited if obviously if you're already a WordPress developer, or you want something that sort of is a bit like batteries included, but you can also craft your own batteries if you want to. I'm not sure if that's a fantastic answer to your question,
Yeah,
but
no, I did the course in WordPress, and at the end, just last 5 minutes, he was like, no one uses that any longer. It's got a lot of security issues. Don't use it. I think the course was 2 months or something. I was like, okay, why didn't you do something
yeah,
that
it's.
you can use and it's more secure? And
I don't know a ton about it. I do feel if you don't step outside of the confines, and
Yeah, it's just kind of a comment on security, which is that playing defense always loses. And if you're a target in today's ecosystem, you can't really defend yourself. So a lot of the times, one of the reasons why these website generators will be chosen isn't even because they're generators, but it's because you can offset liability by allowing them to host. So basically, you're going to be insecure either way, so you're just choosing someone else to take the fall for your companies.
yeah, say if you want to cheap out on WordPress hosting and you get a free or a very cheap bit of compute in Amazon and you slap WordPress on it and then you forget about it, that will essentially be like, say that's WordPress 5.1 and 5.4 is out, and there's a massive vulnerability in 5.1. If you use a hosted solution, it'll update the WordPress version for you and potentially tell you like you have bad plugins. But if you're running an old version of WordPress on a website, the term shell pinata is sort of like, it'll allow an attacker to sort of get a shell into the system that WordPress is on and then bash around and potentially destroy data. It's still a valid choice. Obviously, yes, if you're going to run WordPress in production, you sort of almost have to have like system administrator, like Linux skills to run a good WordPress instance, or you just rely on WordPress.com and you let them host it for you, which is a lot easier and a lot more out of the box. Sources Wix. Yeah. Tim.
I want to make one quick comment too. Don't forget, WordPress is one of the most popular website builders in web right now. You're going to hear a lot more of its security problems become of late, just because it's the most popular.
And it's open source. So people are spending, it's very, if you can find sort of a vulnerability in WordPress, for one, it's easy because it's open source. But then arguably, it being open source means that people are pretty quick to patch things themselves. So it's like it's a double-edged sword. I don't think it should be considered like legacy, but it's definitely not. It's not the cool kid on the block, but it doesn't mean it's sort of it's many websites still use it. I'd say most local like agencies and so on and so forth are likely still, shops. So there's also like websites that are more dedicated purely to commerce. I feel like everyone here knows what Shopify is. We even have an ex-Shopify employee in-house. Shout out to him. Even though you have some interesting opinions about Shopify. There's also WooCommerce, which, as you see by like the very faint WordPress logo, is actually like just a WordPress plugin for WordPress that gives you like commerce ability in WordPress. So these are valid choices. So everything I've talked about so far has sort of been the IKEA of websites. It's a store that you go to do something, or potentially, get a collection of tools to build it yourself, right? Like, obviously, you still need the skill to put together something, and like WordPress could be quite low level, but for most people, it's pretty high level. And it's probably what most big companies want. You want your marketing team to be able to change the website copy without having to bug a developer. You want something that potentially a non-technical person can use. I don't feel like I'm talking to that room though. How about the more artisan / handcrafted approach to making websites? Like this is you making an Astro site, So there is things like Hugo and Jekyll, and many other sort of like purely static website generators. I've got a picture of like a Gundam set to the left. A lot of these come out the box with pre-made templates as well. This picture to the right is my friend Keenan's blog.pirated.tech. Keenan had actually went and built like a full like blog system with like a back end and like dynamic JavaScript. And then I think the first thing he did was made a blog post about his blog system and then proceeded to write no more content. He wanted to write about his like pirating like home lab setup, and he realized that like he wanted to write it, but he didn't want to make a website. So he picked up Hugo, he found a template that he liked, he wrote in a markdown file in a folder, he ran a Hugo command, it spat out some HTML, he put it on the internet, and Bob was his uncle, right? For a lot of people, these are perfectly valid tools. I do believe ctsnl.ca is a Jekyll site. It's been like that for a while. It's nothing to get like overtly excited about. You get blog-like features with blog posts if you want to have like one-off pages like about us. I know Tim for like a very long time was basically updating this jobs page. It was updated every Thursday for quite some time. But so like, yeah, with you get sort of, and I also think this was made using a theme. Yes. Created by Love by Philo with Jekyll based on Feeling Responsive. So it is a website using a theme. So like when you built this, Tim, did you have to do a lot of messing around to get it to look nice?
More about like with less
a little bit of mucking around, but at least gave you like a good sort of base plate to work off of, right? So these are tools. If you're currently using this as your go-to, like this is how my website is built, perfectly valid tools to use, right? There's also then sort of the world of like, you know, React, Svelte, Vue, Express, Node.js, so on and so forth. In my opinion, for building the types of websites we're talking about here today, it is more comparable to primitive technology. If you're building a website, don't choose tools that people use to build web applications. I see a lot of people sort of be like, you know, they finish a course in web dev and they're like, I should work on a more full stack project with a backend. And also, I need a personal site. And they go, oh, 2 birds, 1 stone. I'll make a personal site with a backend. No, don't do that. Build a full stack application, yes, but don't make your personal website a web application. Not saying it's bad, I'm just saying that when I see people with like personal sites that have loading spinners, I'm like, why is there a loading spinner on a personal site? Like, I guess if you're hitting a CMS in the back end and you have a complex blog, but I do think it's better if you're just choosing a stack for a personal website to pick something a bit more minimal. And if you still want to have some cool project in your portfolio that like has a backend with a database and so on, literally make anything else. Just have your personal brand page should hopefully look nice. You spend more time on the design of it and be built using boring technologies, because you don't want to be like, oh, you might say, it'd be like a recruiter reaches out and be like, oh, I got your resume with your website in it, but when I went to it, it was down. So you might need to do DevOps like work to bring up your personal site. Like, try not to do that. If you're doing it, yet again, it's fine, but I don't think it's a very clever idea. So what if we do want control over how the final website is built / set up, and we don't mind getting our hands dirty? What options are there? You won't at all guess what the next slide is. Ta-da! Yet again, salt shaker. There is a lot of tools out there, but Astro's pretty cool. So for one, I assume I'm preaching to the choir here. Yes, Astro is a JavaScript framework, and sometimes JavaScript gets a bit of a bad rap for being a bit of a bloated piece of technology. It definitely, though, if you use it in the way that it's intended, helps you ship less JavaScript to end browsers. So you're not dealing with like a massive bundle. Like if you're doing it sort of the web application way, you could have like, I don't know, a megabyte of React slop for your like personal website. Astro is primarily written using JavaScript, but it's definitely not, it does not speak to this type of, is even like 3 GB node modules type JavaScript. So without further ado, if your hands are greasy, is there a paper towel on the back? It is time to degreasify and get out your laptop. And if you don't mind, navigating to jackharrhy.dev. Don't forget to spell my last name correctly, i.e. incorrectly, with the H before the last Y. And you will see there is a link on the main website to head to this subpage. As I said, if you're not next to someone, if you don't have a laptop, you don't have to pull one out. Just maybe find someone next to you to sort of sit along with. Even if you do have a laptop, this should still be enjoyable for folks that don't follow along. But I will try to keep people following along. I will leave this up for a bit. But yeah, so my website, just my name, Jack Harrhy, HARRHY.dev. And when you get to the main website, there's a link at the top for Astro Workshop attendees. Click here. And so when you head to this page, there's a bunch of links and a big old React component. Ignore that for now. The first link to open up will be link number 2 to astro.new. So from the top, jackharrhy.dev, H before the last Y. Once you're on the home page, workshop/2025/astro-workshop, and head to astro.new. All right. So, yet again, this was sort of also learned from Ethan's talk in that I'm not going to expect anyone to install anything on their computers. This will all be done via the web browser, so it won't be spend the next like 5 minutes all like taking down the internet trying to do npm install. So if you see here, there's in the top left just the basics. Don't do open in IDX. That will ask for a username and password. If you hit the side corner button, you'll see there's a open in StackBlitz. So if you click that, it'll bring you to a page that'll hopefully boot up. Do an npm install, npm run dev in the browser. And once that's done, you should see some stuff on the right-hand side. So just from the top to make sure people are here, check harrhy.dev. Click on this link, go to here, astro.new, and then once you're at astro.new, head to just the basics, open in StackBlitz, here we are. Everyone to this point, we all good? Cool, all right. I feel like I just wanted to get everyone to this point. We'll step up the gas a little bit, but. So the very first thing, so the window you have open to your right is the preview of the project you're running on StackBlitz. The main window here, it's if you've used VS Code, it's VS Code, not too crazy. We will be using the terminal a little bit too to Command C and run some commands. And yeah, let's get on the go. So the first thing is I do want to delete sort of their own stuff they give us. So if you navigate to the sidebar here, just make sure it's expanded in the project view and head to source, components, and welcome. I'm just going to click into this file, do Command or Control A, delete, and I'm going to put in a p tag with hello world, ending p tag. Boom. So this is Astro. The layout in the left-hand side is sort of like most NPM or React or Express applications. You have a package JSON, which has a single dependency of Astro. You have this source directory, so the welcome component that we cleared out and replaced with a p tag. A pages component with index.astro that contains, so this is the first bit that's sort of weird, is like, what is this .astro file? A .astro file is always usually began with 3 hyphens and ended, well, in the middle there's 3 hyphens. And whatever's between these 2 hyphenated sections is JavaScript. So I'm going to remove this welcome to Astro comment and to simplify it to the 2 imports. And so you'll see we have import welcome from ... components welcome.astro. So that's our welcome here. And we just are able to use the welcome component. If you ever used React before, this might feel extremely familiar. Astro definitely in a way feels like React and is extremely React inspired by some of its aspects. But you'll notice, obviously, we have a full fat HTML page here, and we don't actually see much going on. And that is because if we go to the layout folder, you will see that basically your usual, doc type HTML with the head and the title and some basic style is contained within this file. What you'll see, which is kind of cool, is that this style tag is weirdly sort of hanging in the void. Astro is clever in that it will see style tags, and by default, it doesn't just dump the style tag into the website. It does like scoped styles to make sure that Like if I here, I'll just don't have to copy this for a second, but if I add like a p tag here and say like hello world, but in the body, and then I add a p tag style here for color pink, you'll see the hello world in the body is now pink. It's unseeable pink. Purple's better. But we definitely have a p tag in welcome.astro, but that is currently unaffected. So by default, you get sort of scope styles, which is nice, so you don't have global CSS sort of ruining stuff. So this is obviously a feature that you'd expect out of things like Svelte and React with some packages, but we get this nice sort of just writing this here. So I'll clean this up. And you'll also see, now to some people, you've seen this before, but in layout.astro, there's this slot component. Slot, if I do mdn slot, is actually sort of it's part of the web component spec. But the way that Astro's using it here is sort of like children in React, if you've ever seen that before. So in index.astro, we have our layout component with a welcome child beneath it. And so this welcome will basically end up here because this is a child of layout. So I have a little list of things I want to get done. So we've done Astro build, start basic example, welcome screen. Okay, so we're gonna set up CSS. So we already technically have CSS, but who here has used Tailwind before by any chance? Decent number of arms. So I like Tailwind. Tailwind is nice. So I don't know if you've tried to add Tailwind to a project before. Sometimes it's a little bit complicated to be like, oh, I have to install the package, I have to run the binary, I have to make sure my Tailwind configuration is set up correctly. So if you go back to the page I sent you before, my workshops page, or we're gonna head to, just open up a new tab with astro.build and head to the documentation section. We're gonna copy a bunch of random stuff from this site rather than having to sort of like copy things out. So search bar at the top of the page, search for add Tailwind. You'll see there's an option here. So on docs.astro.build, search bar, add Tailwind 4. It'll bring you to this section here. And you can stay on the npm section. And it gives you a command to put in your terminal, npx astro add Tailwind. So I'm gonna grab this on the left once more. That was docs.astro.build, Tailwind, add, and copy this to your clipboard. If you head back to the main StackBlitz screen, at the bottom, there's your terminal. You can do Control-C to quit it, because we have to run a command here. And I'm going to do Command-V, i.e. Control-V, to run the npx astro add tailwind command. So once again, that was Control-C, what's there, and run this command. It's going to ask you if you want to add some packages. Just do Y, and it should go ahead and do it. So that was, docs.astro.build, add Tailwind, Control-C the thing, say yes when it tells you to do yes, do yes. All right, and there's one last step we have to do before we'll be good to go. You'll see there's a styles directory. Actually, no, I added it, cool. All right, so by default, underneath source styles global.css, so this file should now be created once you've ran npx astro add tailwind. This now exists, and it'll even tell you here in source layout.astro, we should now add this import. So I'm going to select this text, Command-C, go to the top. Now, there isn't a place to put the hyphens at the moment, so if I just go to the beginning of this, enter, boop, 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 enter, boop, 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 and paste it in. So import the command it gave me. should be good. So once again, let's go to the layout, take what they have to give you, and make sure at the top of the page you have your hyphen, 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 the import statement, hyphen, hyphen, hyphen. I think they also have that here in the web page to copy from as well. And so the server isn't running anymore, so if you hit up on your keyboard, you'll get to the command that it runs, npm install and npm run dev. If you run that command again, or just run npm run dev, you should now see the text is no longer serif text, it is now sans serif. So this is one of the features of Astro that's quite nice, in that if you want to add things to your Astro project, if they've been created and set up as integrations, it usually is as simple as running this npx astro add tailwind. It'll walk you through, so if we head to the Astro config, which you haven't had to look at until now, so it has this nice little defined config thing, and it's given a Vite plugin for Tailwind CSS. So it's configured it for you, and then there's obviously one step that we had to add the import global CSS to sort of get it working, but pretty painless so far getting things set up. And now I should be able to, if I go to welcome.astro, actually what I'll do is I'll go to layout.astro. If you scroll down to the bottom, I'm going to remove the width and height 100%. So I think I found that was buggy. So in layout.astro, I removed some CSS. If I go to welcome again, and I go to my p tag in welcome.astro, I'm going to just do class equals opening quote, probably p-4 text purple 600. There we go. So one nice thing about the Astro files is you don't have to do class name with a capital N. You can just do class, and this is some Tailwind. So class p-4 text-purple 600. We've got some text. So we're not going to go too crazy on like the design here today. I'm mostly showing Astro features. So I'm going to cook a little nav bar so that we can have some sweet navigation. So in the left-hand side, in the Components tab, I'm going to hit New, and I'm going to make navbar.astro, and I'm just going to do a quick little, probably at the top, I'm just going to have a p tag of my Astro site. Feel free for any text that you see me writing to write whatever you want. Riley?
Can you show the layout on Astro? Both Tim and I have the site proper now.
Did you add the triple hyphen import triple hyphen?
Yep, I've got that. The site no longer works.
Do you have styles global.css?
Yes.
Do you any Astro heads able to look at their stuff? I mean, Riley, you are an Astro head.
So you switched from...
Oh, do you do npm run dev?
Yes.
What is it an Astro error or?
The page is just blank. There's no longer content at all.
Does your welcome.astro, is it like a p tag like mine?
Yes.
Uh,
Is the welcome in your layout or in your
index at Astro.
Yeah, I think if I remove the import, the site will just match. Or no, I removed the import, it's still going. So, but is it working on this Chrome? Okay.
Do you figure it out?
No, there's apparently.
Riley and I are both using Firefox.
Oh, yeah, don't use Firefox. If anyone's using Firefox and it's breaking, sign into StackBlitz, save it, and then open it in Chrome. StackBlitz uses web containers, which is like a weird sort of like WASI, what if we ran NPM in a web browser? Yeah, your mileage may extremely vary if you're using Firefox. I should have stated that. With Firefox? Safari, yeah. Use Chrome. You should be able to log into StackBlitz and save it. So if you hit sign in the top right with GitHub, and then you should be able to persist it to your account and then open it in Chrome. I will keep the train moving. Sorry for those that are running into bumps, you might still obviously get stuff. What's up, Dan?
I'll just clarify, it's StackBlitz that's having trouble with Firefox, not Astro.
Yes, yeah. It's StackBlitz has a weird feature that this entire it's lovely because I don't have to get anyone to install anything on their computers, but it also is a very Chrome native environment. Unfortunately, I wish it wasn't, but
Can you show the layout?
sure. So layout.astro has the only change we made to it was the change to the hyphen, and then from the main Tailwind page, we added this import line, which you'll get from this here to the top. All right, so back to, I'm in components. I made a file called navbar.astro. I'm going to, so I have my p tag here, my Astro site, and I'm going to make a new line, nav unordered list, a href equals opening quote slash go to the right this pretty standard boring HTML. I'll have this up on screen for a bit, but and home, closing P, enter, backspace, closing A, backspace, closing UL, backspace, closing nav. So you should have something that looks like this. So it's a nav with a UL, with an A, with a P tag, and all the closing stuff. And if we head back, I'll bring this back open again, actually, and do this probably. I can't split. If we go back to our index.astro, I'm going to copy the second import line where we import welcome, and I'm going to stab in navbar, and just like that, and above welcome, I'm going to put in navbar, and below nav, I'm also going to slap a HR like this. Boom. So got a new component in the components directory, navbar.astro with a p tag. At the top it says my Astro site, nav, ul, a tag, p home, closing stuff, so on and so forth. Nice little line. Also going to head to the layout, and I'm just going to add a quick class equals p-2 on the body, just to give it some breathing room. So that was heading to the layout.astro to line 13 to where the body is, adding class equals p-2. And we can click on this, and it's not going to do anything because we only have one page. So the next step after this, everyone, any problems following through? Cool. How are the Firefox folk doing? Have you migrated?
We've switched to Chrome.
Is it working now?
Yep.
Cool. Sorry about that. All right, so head to pages. So in the left-hand bar, click on this button, go to pages, and I'm going to go to about.astro, and I'm just going to close these. So I'm going to take the contents of index.astro, select everything, copy, go into about.astro, and paste. So the exact same contents as index.astro. I'm going to remove the welcome and just put a p tag for about my amazing site. And I'm going to pop back to my navbar, and I'm going to copy the a tag here and paste and make sure I send one to /about with the text about. So as seen, we now have a new file called about.astro that contains basically the exact same content as before. We can remove the welcome import at the top of the screen and just rely on the navbar component and the layout. So we removed the welcome as just a p tag that says about my amazing site, and we've added to the navbar a new a tag with a p tag for about. And you would never guess, if we click on about, we get about my amazing site on the about page. So this is so far is nothing extremely riveting. What is nice is that we get to use components. So if you're used to working in React, you kind of start to morph your brain around thinking about things as components and children. If people here have used things like Jinja in Python or other like templating languages, templates aren't really components. I know we haven't really added like properties on things, but you can basically think of things like navbar.astro and welcome.astro, even the layout, sort of like components. But we're not writing, like when the website actually gets spit out the other end, there is currently no JavaScript in this website, right? Your development environment, what you get to actually write and work in is JavaScript. Like the code that you're writing here is JavaScript. And even though this is sort of like a weird JSX-like JavaScript, but the final output is actually just plain, no bullshit HTML. This does matter if you're trying to build a website that has good search engine optimization. Some people spend a lot of time trying to optimize their websites for like the smallest bundle as possible, the quickest, least contextful paint, whatever the different metrics. The easiest way to get good, bundle size is to not have a bundle. So even though I know in my slides about this is Astro is a JavaScript framework, sort of, the actual website that's getting spit out on the other side is sort of a full fat boring HTML website. But like sometimes you do need some features which are not really made for static websites. So if you're using Hugo, for example, and this is sort of what I was trying to show before. I'll have a little bit of a tangent, so from the actual workshop bit. So one of the requirements when I was building the Computer Science Society website is we stored our meeting minutes in a GitHub repository that was separate to the website. So if I actually head to the Computer Science Society website on GitHub, or the GitHub organization, we have a folder, a GitHub repository filled with markdown files called executive docs. And basically these are sort of the, like, whenever we'd have meetings, somebody would be tasked with opening this up and writing some markdown that would then eventually get turned into PDF via Pandoc. And I wanted a way to sort of allow the repository that contained all of our meeting notes and our website to still be able to like update automatically. So I went a bit of a weird route. Now, if you look at the inspect element on this page, you go to the network tab, you'll see the last fetch on the page is to this file called docs.json. Now, docs.json is actually a JavaScript object notation JSON file containing all of the documents with their names and their paths and so on. And it's actually stored on mun servers. So there's cs.mun.ca/csclub/executive-documents.json. So what it means is I don't have to build a new version of the website whenever a new document is put onto the thing, because there's a client-side component that'll go and fetch the documents endpoint and render a list of items on this page. Now, an assumption you would make is, oh, you have a JavaScript component on your page. That means then that the whole entire page is JavaScript. If you see the initial request sent in the network tab and go to the response, the preview, now there's no CSS on this because it's the first request you get before the CSS. You'll see that there's still text in it, right? But there's still static HTML being sent back over the wire. But when it gets to the latest document section, that's completely empty. And if we actually go to the HTML and we inspect element on one of these, you'll see there's this special component referred to as an Astro island. And every single element that is one of these like dynamically created A tags is basically under this Astro island. So my tangent is almost over, but one of the big things about Astro is this concept of islands. So an island is best sort of described as this. So there are parts of your website that you want to be interactive, right? So if you want the header on the top of your page to show what thing you're on, or an image carousel of images moving across the screen, with some static things like Hugo and 11t, so on and so forth, you'd have to reach for a pure JavaScript implementation of that, and you're sort of like left to your own devices of how to build the interactive portion of the page. But with Astro, you basically have that as a first-class citizen. The way that I'm going to show that to you today is we are going to add a React component to our Astro site. So back to the Astro site. So I'm going to, actually I'm just going to add this to the About page because the About page is basically empty. If you go to the link that I sent, you'll see there's a big chunk of React code at the bottom of the page. So grab that, just scroll down, get that whole thing in your clipboard. Boom, boom, boom. So yet again, that was the Astro Workshop attendees link, and copy the component to your clipboard. You can look at it if you want. It's a use state, few use states. It's a use ref. It's a use effect. It's a fetch. It's some, I wouldn't write this React code. I would use React Router, React Router and TAN-stack-query. But for now, this is it's demo code. We don't not code you can write at work, but code you can put here. So I have the React component in my clipboard, and I'm going to come to here into components, and I'm going to make Pokemon.jsx, and I'm going to paste in the component. So underneath, components, Pokemon.jsx, we now have a pretty boring React component. So if you go back to docs.astro.build, the same spot we have the add tailwind for, and head back to the search bar, if you see add React, or is it, So if you search React in this search bar, it'll bring you to, there's an integration / extension called astro.js/react. And it is basically as simple, you have to go here, it's just npx astro add react. So I'm going to copy this to my clipboard and come in here. Same exact step as Tailwind. I'm just going to Control-C my terminal, paste in npx space astro space add space react, hit enter. It's going to do some stuff, resolve some packages. I'm going to say yes. And while it's doing that, I'm going to take line 2 of about and copy it, and I'm going to make this one, instead of navbar.astro, I'm going to do pokemon.jsx and call it Pokemon. My terminal wants me to hit yes once more. I'm going to keep hitting yes. So, yep, did that npx astro add react, said yes a bunch of times. And I'm going to hit up a few times, get back to the npm install and npm run dev, run that command. It's going to do its thing. It's going to refresh the page. It's going to bring back to the home page. And if I head back to about again, I didn't put it in the thing. So I've imported Pokemon. Now this is the one thing that's a little bit funky. I'm actually going to pull this from the final version because I'm lazy. Right, yeah. So when you use a component that isn't a static component, so you'll see, I've got Pokemon, but then I've got this directive, client::load. And so what it basically says is that this is something that shouldn't just be rendered once on the server side. It should sort of basically be loaded once the client loads as well. So I'll save that. And yep, so I've added my Pokemon.jsx from this big old block of code. I've got, my Pokemon with client :load. And now I can search for Ditto, and I get Ditto on the right-hand side. And if I change that to Pikachu.
My favorite Pokemon.
Yeah. Is that Pikachu?
There's no T.
Pikachu. There we go. Type electric. Thank you to the Pokemon API that everyone uses in demos. But yeah, so like, yet again, there's not a ton to see here, but what's nice about Astro is you don't lose the functionality that you'd sort of expect from things like React and Vue and Svelte and so on and so forth. You can still basically have your client-side components when you want them, but they don't have to sort of be your entire application. I assume most people here who are web developers know if your company likely has an index.html with a single div with an ID of root, and your entire application is spawned from that. This is still React, same React you know and love, but it's sort of been confined to just one little island in the context of a much more boring surrounding, website. Yeah, and I think the way it even works too is that if I visit the homepage, there's no JavaScript on the homepage, right? So there's no need to have a script tag on the homepage to bring in React, because there's no React on the homepage. It's only once you go to the About page will it then have to potentially be like, oh, this page actually needs JavaScript, so I'm going to pull in a script tag. And even then, if I was adding React to a project, like, where did I add the script tag? Like, there is no script tag pointing to React. It's just sort of there. So like, I'm sort of trying to go through this slow to make sure everyone's on the same page, but you could see if you're someone that already is experienced with this sort of thing, that you can make progress quite quickly. And you're also basically not limited to like, oh, like I'm building a static website, but I want to add, a social bar to see the latest Blue Sky posts or Mastodon posts from my organization. So like, you don't have to then be like, oh, I have to sort of reach for something like heavy-handed or like write the JavaScript myself, or like sort of, it's a bit awkward then to sort of add functionality to a static site that's dynamic. With Astro, it's very much first class that you just get that functionality sort of out of the box. But like a lot of people might want to make blogs. Like blogs are pretty popular for software developers, and even non-software developers for, I want to have some written content on my website about the stuff that I'm doing, either projects I've worked on or recipes that I like, so on and so forth. So Astro has a very good solution for that. But the first thing we're going to do is make a new folder underneath source, and I'm going to call it blog. And underneath blog in source, I'm going to make peanut.md. So yeah, new folder, blog, new file, peanut.md. Similar to files like, your pages, I'm going to add title, peanut, description, my neighbor's cat, and then I'm going to say, this is a story about Peanut the cat. So very similar to sort of the .astro files, except this is a .markdown file. So you still get your hyphen. This is sort of what is referred to in, as YAML front matter. So this is like full fat YAML up here for defining stuff, but I'm just using it for a title and description. I'm going to then make a new page here called astro.md. As I've said before, if you don't have to copy the exact bits of text, if you want to put your cat's name in there or put something you want to talk about, don't have to be one-to-one. I'm going to take the entire contents of peanut.md, paste it into Astro, and so Astro, cool tool. I like Astro. All right. So yeah, blog folder, .md files in here. You know, if you've done stuff before, you've likely seen this structure before. Different tools have ways that you would sort of interface with this. The way that Astro does it is extremely nice because it'll integrate very well with our existing .astro files. So I'm going to head back to our Astro docs page and head to the search bar, and I'm going to search for content collections. Don't look at the API reference. You're going to have to scroll down to where it says learn. So the first thing underneath learn, it says content collections. So a lot of websites have content, right? Like if you're building a website for a clothing brand, your content is potentially shirts. If you're building a blog, your content is posts. If you're building, you know, there's some concept of a post or a postable thing that you can put on your page. Content collections are Astro's sort of solution to that thing. So on the content collections page, if you head to defining collections, so we're going to skip to the best one to go to is this one, right? Where it says defining the collection schema. So I'm going to copy this entire bit of code because it's sort of the final example. And I'm going to bring it back to so defining the collection schema, source content.config.ts. So I'm actually just going to copy this to make sure I get that right. So make a new file under source, call it content.config.ts, and take this entire section and paste it into our content config. Remove lines 13 to 20, the dogs definition, and then remove the dogs definition from line 14. Let me just make this a bit bigger for you folks. And we can remove, yeah, so we've got our line 4 blog define collection loader, a glob on pattern ****.md, the base being source data blog. I'm actually going to remove, just make this just source/blog. So make sure that the base is ./source/blog, and our files such as astro.md and p.md just have a title and description. So in our content config, we're going to remove the update date pub date, just leave it title and description. So if you're with me so far, we have our content.config.ts underneath source with a definition of a collection, which is loaded in from files basically on disk that should have, well, are required to have a title and description. So if you go back to the content collection page for a second, you'll see we've defined a collection. Now all we have to do is make use of it. So the on this page for using content in Astro templates, I'm going to grab the second and third line here, the import get collection const posts, and I'm going to head to our index.astro page, our home page. I'm going to paste it in here. So line 6 and 7 have been copied from using content in Astro templates, source pages index.astro, and we now have a big chunk of posts. So we have posts. Obviously, they're not in the page yet because we haven't told it how to do that. What I'm now going to do is I'm going to do what kind of looks like React code to some people. So I've opened and closed some curly braces after welcome, and I'm going to do posts.map, and I'm going to do opening parenthesis, and post singular, and then go to the right. I'm defining a JavaScript arrow function in a map. So =, left bracket, and then parenthesis once more, hit enter, and I'm going to then do p tag opening curly brace, post.id, closing p tag. And did I do that? Oh, okay. So, and you might also have to just Command C / Control C the thing and run it once more just to make sure it updates. Boom. Okay. So yet again, that was opening, closing, parenthesis, underneath welcome. We do posts.map and map over each post using JavaScript like arrow syntax, and then we get the post out of it, and p tag post.id. And lo and behold, our Astro and our Peanut, or whatever you've written down in yours, is now available. These are the identifiers, sort of the slugs of the posts. If I then change post.id to post.data.title, we instead get the data of the post. So if I instead, after the p tag, so after this curly brace here, I'm going to do space hyphen space, then open up more curly braces, post.data.description. And there we go. We now have both the title of each of the markdown files and also the description. So this is sort of the developer blog approach of like, you have to go in, and if you want to make changes to your blog, you actually have to go in and write in Markdown, right? So I can change the title, cool tool I like to use, and you'll see it'll update, so on and so forth. So like this is not really like a content management system, so to speak. This is basically just like a, you are a developer, you want to write in a Markdown file about what you're doing, and then you build some HTML around that. What we don't have at the moment, though, obviously, is I can't click on it, and I can't go to the post. So that's the last piece of the content collection section. So if we go back to this page, you'll see there is generating routes from content and building for static output. So basically, this entire thing we can sort of copy wholesale. But first things first, you see this, it wants it to be under source, pages, posts, open bracket, ID, closing bracket, .astro. So if I take this section of it, so just posts/id.astro, and I come back in here, so I head back to my pages section, make a new file. Because this is VS Code, it's clever to know it should be in a folder. So posts, open bracket, ID, closing bracket, .astro. So it'll create a folder called posts with a file called id.astro. And if I take this here, I'll sort of copy this then and paste it in. And hypothetically, now we have the content here. It won't look proper because we don't have our layout, so it won't be styled by Tailwind. But I'm going to head back to our index.astro and add a new line above our p tag in posts and do href equals, what was that? It was post ID, right. So href equals, and I want to kind of do some string interpolation. So I'm going to open up curly bracket, and then the backtick, the key next to 1 to the left of it without shift, backtick, and then do /posts/ $, open closing post.id. I'm going to indent my p tag and close the a tag. So yet again, that was making a new a tag around our p tag, in which we have the href with the opening curly brace, backtick operator, /posts, $, so on and so forth. And now I can click on them and I like Astro. And if I refresh, I can go back to here and Peanut, my neighbor's cat. It doesn't look good because we copied the code directly from the website and it didn't pull in our layout. So if I do the exact same thing I've done before, so I'm going to copy line 10 and 11 of index.astro, head to id.astro, and paste these in here. So now the first line is layout, the second line is navbar. Select this, tab, enter, \, layout, And then I also have to go back to index.astro and copy lines 3 and 4, the nav bar and the layout, and make sure they're included here. Moving a little bit faster. Sorry if I'm like losing people, but I have some stuff I want to get through, so, and also some Q&A at the end. But now, if I go to them, could not load file. Aha. So id.astro is in a directory deeper than about an index. So lines 3 and 4, I have to do another layer of // and boom. So we have our Astro site with home, about, Astro, I like Astro. And there we go. You can go between these. That's nice and cool. So for a developer who's like writing themselves, like you don't necessarily need a full fat content management system if you're fine to sort of just write your markdown in a file on your computer, or like write something in your Apple Notes app potentially and then copy and paste it into this folder once you're done. Perfectly viable. But I kept talking about WordPress and like Squarespace and stuff like that. Like it should still be possible for a website that you build like this to have a non-technical person potentially be able to add new posts for it. I'm going to step away from the workshop portion for a second, and I'm going to talk a bit about when I had to do this for a friend of mine. So my roommate wanted to do some writing, and so he wanted to do sort of, he was working on a zine, and he wanted to move towards maybe having like writing on the web. Now, this is sort of a weird project in that I never really like finished it, but I built the system and I built it in a way that I got to have my nice, Astro site that I built myself, but I still then had a interface that he could go to author new posts for the website. So this is what we cooked up with. As you can likely tell by the lorem ipsum, this is not exactly finalized, supposedly, but it's sort of a zine / like online thing my roommate was making called Hyperlocalized, and so I deployed it to my website. So if we look at like I said with the Mun website, if we go to the network tab, we can see that this site is completely static. Like all of the posts, Sword and Ball, how to write your first blog post, like these are all completely static. But if we go to a subroute here called /key static, you'll see that this is more than just an Astro website. It also hosts a content management system for non-technical people on the website. So what I can actually do is, now I've set this up in the code, similar to where I did like a defined collection in Astro. I defined a key static collection that has a bunch of properties. So if I go to my new section, add a new post, call it Astro Workshop 2025, and the image URL, I'm just gonna, grab something very random, a picture of myself here, and then in here I'm gonna write hello world and create. Entry created. Now, what's quite interesting about this entry, so I've made a new entry. If I go to hyperlocalized, you actually won't see the entry immediately. It's not on the page yet, but you'll see that each post has this view on GitHub button. So key static is interesting in that this has now actually been made as a commit in the repository. So it's sort of weird in that key static expects you to log in to GitHub on the site. So the person you're with has to have a GitHub account, which is sort of awkward in a bit, but it's really nice because this web interface will actually then make a commit to the project under the user account that basically created that post. And you'll see there's an orange thing on this, which I assume a lot of people know what this is, but this is sort of a GitHub action kicking in to actually build a new version of hyperlocalized. But yeah, so like I can still sort of have my like hyper customized like code written the way I want it to, CSS the way that I like it. My roommate was going for this sort of like newspaper type approach. I spent a lot of time trying to figure out how to do like a CSS newspaper look really hard. So as you can see, I didn't really get to that bit. But I spent enough time to sort of have this set up where I had like, you know, the main header post and then a selection of posts between that and the about page, so on and so forth. So I still had sort of full control over how things looked. This is also deployed to my own infrastructure. When I talked earlier about funds, Astro is able to basically spit out static HTML on the other end. So if people here have used things like GitHub pages, Cloudflare pages, like Netlify, your Mun page, so on and so forth. One of the nice things from a funds perspective is that you don't have to pay for hosting, right? It's not a WordPress instance that has to receive requests or a Squarespace site that you need to pay some like not too cheap monthly fee for. It gives you a bundle that's quite easy to just simply throw it up on a web server. So I think I'm probably going to just rush through some of the features bits. I don't know at what point in time the thing we get to. I'll drop a link to sort of the final example. I think the only thing that I did in the final version is I showed, the posts look basically the same. The Pokemon component is here, so you have a Pokemon component. There was one thing I did add. If people here have heard of view transitions, sort of a newer web feature that you can have like a transition from one page to another. I'm going to quickly add that to the demo to show you how easy it is. You don't have to follow for this one. I'm just going to rush it out. But all I have to do is grab this little client router, go back to my layout, slap in the import, ensure this is somewhere on the page basically. And just like that, we have like smooth transitions between the pages, which is pretty cool. Yet again, if you wanted that sort of functionality, you'd have to be like, oh shit, I have to now make this whole thing a React thing with, you know, framer motion and a bunch of crazy stuff. But as you see, like, I just kind of got it for free, right? It's the sort of like batteries included, like things that web pages usually need are included out of the box. Like when we removed the code from welcome.astro, we were starting from basically nothing. And we've got to the point that we have a React component that we can do searching for. We have this homepage thing with different stuff. A thing I wanted to get to was Astro has a selection of integrations with different systems. So it has like mermaid diagrams. You can generate a sitemap for you automatically. The React module, MDX module. What I pulled in for the bit I didn't get to was a feed loader. So the feed loader lets you basically pull content from an external RSS feed into your website. So the example in the finished version was link blog. So on my website, there is a link blog where I sort of blog about things on the internet that I like to consume. And I was pretty proud of this. The mug going between pages, I spent a while on that. That was kind of hard, but I liked it quite a bit. But the link blog actually has an RSS feed. So in this version, the complete example, which like I said, I'll give a link to, you'll see that we have a blog content collection like that we did earlier, but then we also have this feed loader collection, which is pulled in from an external package, which is hitting an endpoint on my website for an RSS endpoint. And yet again, RSS on my website is not done using like having to hand roll it. Yet again, there's stuff built in for that, as there is for basically everything else. So like add an RSS feed. Where's that one? There you go. So if you have a blog page on your website, you add this source pages RSS.xml.js. You then sort of give it a collection to feed in. I think they have empty items here. So yeah, they have the example of like, you can call the same get collections function you saw earlier, and then put those as RSS items. That's the exact thing that I'm doing. What I actually did too, which was interesting, is for my link blog, I wanted the ability to upload a link blog to the website, but you wouldn't get it in your RSS reader until the next day. So I could continue to work on the link blog entry during the day that I was writing it on, and it would only end up in your feed reader the day afterwards. So this is a bit that I haven't talked too much about because Astro is a bit of there's too much to talk about when it comes to Astro. But if we head to the My Astro sites and to source, so you'll see this is on /linkblog/rss.xml. So we go to pages, link blog, rss.xml. You'll actually see that on line 4, I export const pre-render equals false. So I basically say, don't pre-render this page, right? Like run this page dynamically. And what it actually does is it makes sure that the posts are before today at 8 p.m. If they're not before today, 8 a.m. If they're not before today at 8 a.m., they don't get included. So if I had a link blog post today that I posted now at 6:40 p.m., obviously 6:40 p.m. is beyond 8 a.m. today. And if I had this as static HTML, it means then I'd also then have to build a new version of the RSS endpoint every single time the page runs. But I've selectively said this one page shouldn't be pre-rendered, it should be generated dynamically. What it also means is that I can't put this website on GitHub Pages. It's a feature of Astro sort of referred to as adapters, in that there's like, what if I put in here, Node? Yeah, so there's a Node package to deploy as Node. There's GitHub Pages, which requires it to be configured as static. There's Cloudflare for Cloudflare pages, which lets you run them as workers, I believe, as well. So you can get dynamic features if you want. Another thing about Astro is sometimes I see certain website things and like a Hugo site looks like a Hugo site, or a WordPress site looks like a WordPress site. They definitely have a certain feel to them. I kind of like, even though I didn't live through it, I'm a fan of the GeoCities era of where websites were sort of made using simpler things and high contrast colors and fun and little Tamagotchis you can click on to feed them and stupid things like that. People would assume potentially if you're building a site like this, that it'd be better to use like raw HTML. I did actually try, but I felt like I really still wanted the idea of components. I think I was showing Dan, who's in the room, the ability to add Svelte to Astro. So this tomato in the bottom right is technically a Svelte component. If I head to like the hikes page, this is a solid.js component that's a fully dynamic map. And what's cool too is that like this is hosted on cs.mun.ca. So yet again, I actually don't have the ability to do compute in this context, but I can still do client-side JavaScript to do what I want. Sort of like closing notes, I do want to do some Q&A and get people to leave before potentially 7 o'clock. But Astro is sick. Like I have used it extensively. It has so many features. One thing too. So like everyone that I raised their hand earlier, I believe I've mentioned most of you at the end of my I Like Astro blog post, where I talk about all of my friends that use it. So I believe Riley, you're running it still. Liam, Earl, Mitchell, who's in the audience, Keenan, who's in Cornerbrook, Josh, Devin, Ethan, Evan, Gavin. Like I've sort of corrupted, so to speak, a bunch of people to use Astro. I feel like most people have sort of basically sort of bitten the Astro pie and been like, oh, this is kind of nice. So I've thankfully gotten a lot of people to sort of start using it, and I think most people that's used it have had a good time with it. Where was the last bit of the talk? But yeah, any questions about stuff I've talked about? Any completely potentially unrelated questions to things that I didn't talk about? How was people? Yeah.
why should I use Astro? Because I still need to code. And if I want the pre-built kind of platform, then there is a Wix, Webflow, and lots of other platform. So what is the something very out of box, or what is extra special things in the Astro that is not available in the other platforms? Because I noticed the speed is also similar to Shopify, and SEO and ABA, all of these things are already present in the other platforms too. Thank you.
Yeah, so I mean, sort of as much as my last bit has been the workshop on Astro, my first section was sort of, there's many ways to build websites, right? So if you're building a heavily e-commerce built system, from a time and funds perspective, it potentially is clever or better to just use Shopify, pick a theme that already works, or use their own like liquid templates, or I think Shopify has a thing called Hydrogen. That's sort of a like headless commerce framework that lets you, like, gives you sort of like a bin of different, like, oh, here's your money component and your pagination component and your cache and so on and so forth. Yet again, it's like, I don't know, like if I was tasked right here, right now to like make e-commerce website that people wanted some crazy features on and they wanted to use Shopify, like I would potentially like weigh like Astro against like Hydrogen or just using Shopify. I do think like a lot of what Astro I think is best for is these sorts of like a bit more homegrown, closer to you, closer to like your community or your event, your entity, so on and so forth. You can still use it, obviously. Like I'm planning on using it outside of work. I'm started this sort of like pseudo startup with a friend of mine, and we're planning on making a bunch of landing pages for different potential things that our company could be, and doing some email marketing to find what clicks the most. Like I'm going to use Astro for that because I want the ability to sort of like, you know, have control over the content system, the CMS system, and make sure I can build something that my, you know, the person I'm working with can use. Like for my website, I do actually have some level of like knowledge into who's visiting it. I use something called Goat Counter, which is like it's a website tracking thing. As you can probably see, I can see the big old uptick of people both visiting my homepage today and visiting the Astro workshop page. So like there and this I think if I search for like Goat Counter Astro, they show Goat Counter. I think they show Goat Counter. But like Goat Counter is as simple as just like slapping a script tag into your header, right? So like same with Google Analytics. So yeah, like there are still similar approaches that if you wanted to add like analytics and SEO to WordPress, that you'd apply it to Astro. It does obviously drop you down a few layers of you're a bit more hands-on with it, but then there's like, you know, so if I search even on the Astro thing for SEO, oh yeah, there was one thing I wanted where when I posted my link blogs in places, I wanted to be able for them to have a nice OG image, right, the open graph image. So if I just quickly dive into here, if I go into the CTS Discord and drop it here, there you go. So like I added the right like Twitter and open graph tags to make sure that I'd get like an OG image, I'd get, you know, the title of the page, the description, so on and so forth. So there are features that basically let you still make sure that you have a site that Google likes, that when you link it on social media, has all the right stuff. Yet again, like it requires you to have knowledge about how to do it. Like it doesn't necessarily, like if you picked a WordPress theme, it would likely come out with this. And when I talk about themes too, I've talked about sort of starting from scratch with Astro. I do know some people that actually do pick the Astro themes. Now, there are some of them that are paid. There are thankfully boatloads that are free. So like blog themes, all sorts of different vibes and things like that. Like there thankfully is like a pretty large community of people, free, there you go, of making like free templates for like different things. So you don't necessarily have to start completely fresh. They even have this thing called Astro Starlight. And Starlight is basically like Astro's own documentation page, I believe, is made using Starlight. So it sort of is an out-of-the-box thing to give you this sort of like experience. So there are ways to start from scratch when it comes to Astro. There was there was the other thing too. So I feel like I'm not really a designer, so I don't build some of the prettiest looking sites. This is an Astro site that I love because I can click on here and I get like a bunch of cats and I can move them around. And even if I go to the About page, the cats stay because, of course they do, because they're client-side components. I can click the shoo button to shoo them out of the way. And there's this post here, design for the computer guest book. So Eva.town, Eva's website, she used a feature of Astro referred to as AstroDB. So AstroDB lets you have some level of persistence of like a database basically to sort of do things. And her guest book has this little thing in the top left, so I can even do like, hello from Jack's Astro Workshop 2025. We like your guest book, Jack. Then drop it a link to here. Boom. Nice and big. So we're gonna break it. I'll submit it. And pick a style. Submit. And now I have put a guest book entry onto Eva's page. And so she built this using Astro, right? So there's no like custom guest book backend. There's just regular old Astro DB stuff happening here. If I go back to the home page and I add some Samwise to the screen and I like back my way to the guest book, they stick around because like it still sort of feels a bit like a web application, even though the way that you build it is, but then the way you deploy it isn't. I've rambled on for a bit. Any questions? Some more? People are just here to chill, hear me vibe out for a bit. Hell yeah. Who here feels, what's up?
Hi there, I'm Priyanka. Thank you for sharing these kind of insightful thoughts. It's really impressive. Actually, I have a question. Say, for example, I have a WordPress blog. So is it possible to migrate into Astro?
Yes. So you might still be able to use WordPress, which is the cool bit. I did briefly touch on this, but I'll actually open up the link to it. Astro has documentation on sort of using WordPress as a CMS. So WordPress, of course, holds your content, and the WordPress's job is usually also then to like host the website for the content, right? You can use WordPress as a content management system. So the posts will still live in WordPress, but similar to how we had the defined collection for the markdown files and the defined collection for my external feed, you would be able to basically define a collection. So they have this thing where you set up a Astro project, a WordPress site, and boom. I mean, you put in your site. It supports top-level fetch, so like await, fetch your site WP JSON, WP V2 posts, and there you go. You can iterate over your posts to sort of get them in here. So it would basically mean that you'd sort of have like your, you'd have your WordPress content in WordPress, but then you'd have your full control over how the actual website looks in Astro while still using WordPress to store the content. It's sort of, yet again, like you don't get it for like free. It's not like a one-click button. If you're using Astro, you're writing some code, but there's not much code. And you'd still then like, even if you had a client that was comfortable using the WordPress interface, you could still have the visual content be powered by Astro.
Okay, thank you.
No problem.
Question
And as Abdul Kabir said earlier, and Riley said in his last talk, this is a Thursday, and Thursdays are CTSNL days. So if the type of stuff that I talk about or other technical things tickle your fancy, we meet every single Thursday, 7 onwards, at the Jumping Bean on Elizabeth Avenue. We also have a Discord, discord.ctsnl.ca, where we sort of just hang out, talk about this sort of stuff. I also exist on the internet and have a website and like talking about websites. So feel free to add me on whatever you want, or shoot me an email. I like this stuff. I feel like I don't just show people Astro and then run away. I like helping them out and corrupting more people to use Astro. But even like if you say you're not super technical or you are and you want to ask me like, Jack, like someone came to me and they want me to build this website, like I'm not going to be like Astro. Like sometimes picking WordPress is fine. Picking Squarespace is fine. Picking Shopify is fine. There's like so many ways to build websites. Definitely consider what will be like the path of least resistance or the most sensible path to building stuff. But yeah, Astro is cool. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. We sent an email with feedback form in case you have any feedback for us. In absence of that, please come around for our next event.